Hi, I'm Michael Bennet. I recently introduced a bill called the Payback Act that requires every dollar of bailout money returned from the banks and auto companies to be paid back to the taxpayers for deficit reduction only, not additional spending. As this year's budget process in the Senate gets underway, the senators who are crafting the budget have a chance to make sure that the return bailout money goes to pay down our debt and doesn't go toward additional spending. And if the budget resolution doesn't do that, I intend to amend the budget to make sure it does, because getting our fiscal house in order is far too important to this country's economy and to our future generations. The national debt now exceeds $12 trillion, the highest percentage of our gross domestic product since World War II. $12 trillion. $1 trillion bills would fill over 800,000 classrooms. And we're talking about $12 trillion. For about 25 kids to every classroom in this country, that's enough money to fill every classroom in the United States 4 times. Those are big numbers, but what exactly does that mean? At $12 trillion, our national debt is bigger than the gross domestic products of the largest economies in the world. To put things differently, every man, woman, and child in the country would need to pay $39,120 to cover our shortfall. So a family of 5 like mine would need to pay nearly $200,000 for its share of the nation's debt. With that money, a young Coloradan could attend the University of Colorado for 4 years, get a 2-year master's degree, and have enough left over to put a big down payment on a home. How did large projected surpluses in the 1990s turn into deficits as far as the eye can see? The previous administration dropped important spending limits like PAYGO and established new priorities, tax cuts that weren't paid for, a prescription drug plan that was piled on the deficit, unfunded mandates like No Child Left Behind, and the war in Iraq. Now we have had to deal with the worst recession since the Great Depression, and important steps we've taken to provide middle class and small business tax cuts and preserve jobs for police officers and teachers have contributed to the red ink. People in Colorado hear terms like bailout and TARP, terms that are now infamous. To some, these terms represent unnecessary government intervention. They see their hard-earned money being used to stabilize our biggest companies and wonder what was in it for them. Taxpayers went on the hook for nearly $700 billion through this TARP program. While this intervention prevented a deeper recession, it's time to ensure taxpayers get a fair return on their investment. And that's why I introduced the Pay It Back Act. This legislation recaptures taxpayer investments from the TARP, what many call the bank bailout and the auto bailout, investments from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, what many call the housing bailout, and unused stimulus funds. It makes sure these returned investments are used to pay down the national deficit. The Pay It Back Act takes the money that the banks repaid to the Treasury and applies it all to debt reduction only, and not for any new spending. As of December 31st, 67 recipients of TARP money had paid back all or some of their loans. These repayments total $165.2 billion. That's not chump change. Where is that money going? My bill ensures that these repaid funds are used for deficit reduction, not further spending. It does this by closing TARP's $700 billion revolving door of credit. Although many recovering financial companies have already repaid taxpayers, TARP currently allows the Treasury to keep $700 billion, quote, outstanding at any one time. Therefore, the Treasury has the power to keep lending out this money over and over again. My bill shuts off the Treasury's authority to relend TARP money. Once we recapture it, it goes to pay down the debt. The Pay It Back Act also captures taxpayer investments from the sale of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac stock or securities and makes sure they're used for deficit reduction. In addition, my legislation ensures that Recovery Act funds are used for their intended purpose of job creation and economic recovery. And if there is no such purpose, then those remaining funds also go to reduce the national deficit. This new legislation prevents Recovery Act funds from hanging in limbo for years. Finally, and most importantly, the Pay It Back Act reduces the national debt limit, dollar for dollar, by the amounts that are repaid to the Treasury. Put on a smaller belt, and that will help put Washington on a diet. TARP funds and other assistance efforts have served an important public purpose. But as those investments are being returned, the question is, what are we going to do with them now? When the fast approaching consequences of our long-term debt are so clear, It's just common sense that we should use these funds to pay down the nation's deficit. I hope this presentation offers insight about why now is the time we must address our growing deficit and why ensuring that return bailout funds go toward deficit reduction is a great step in the right direction. When combined with a spending freeze, an independent commission to help Congress take the politics out of difficult debt reduction choices, and pay-as-you-go legislation, which I co-authored, we can strengthen Congress's checkbook balancing skills, get our fiscal house in order, and leave a more responsible legacy for our children. Thank you.